Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. I appreciate you joining me today. What we're going to talk about today is the first week of the Trump presidency and the executive orders that he issued. Not all of them, and not necessarily from a political point of view, strictly from a job market perspective. What has the ability to impact both positively and negatively, and when we can potentially see some results of this. So with that, let's dive right in. So the first one that I want to dive into here is going to be the dismantling of the DEI initiatives within the federal government and investigations into the private sector. So the dismantling at the federal government level, obviously this is going to cause an influx into the workforce of these professionals that previously held these positions, whether they were at the executive level and entry level, somewhere in between. Doesn't really matter, and the amount of employees that this is affecting is unknown at this time. But there is going to be an influx of unemployed people due to this dismantling. And at the end of the day, this is going to be an overall negative to the job market specifically, in that there's going to be more competition temporarily. But the overall long-lasting impact, we shall see. Theoretically, it ends up as a positive in the long run, because now you have more people going into a private sector profit-based type of role. But we shall see on both sides of that equation. Now, on the private sector side, obviously the federal government doesn't really have an ability to, force companies to fire people. So they're framing it as an investigation into the private sector of DEI policies. And they're initially specifically targeting the larger side of the equation, such as publicly traded companies, large nonprofits, major foundations, medical legal associations, universities, and other large entities. And what the language says is they're really encouraging companies to dismantle their private DEI, or I guess you can't say private, their private sector. So their company's internal DEI initiatives. And they're doing it really at the threat of the potential of a federal lawsuit. So the executive order enabled federal lawsuits to be able to be brought against the companies that are engaging in discrimination against the Civil Rights Act. So again, this is going to cause an influx into the workforce, assuming that companies comply. At the very least, I don't see companies increasing their DEI side of the equation. At the very least, it'll either stay the same or it will be removed as a whole. So if it's removed, again, we now have an additional influx into the market. And if it's eliminated, then obviously these are going to be job opportunities that are also eliminated. So on the surface, these are negatives from a job market candidacy perspective. Now, the biggest thing to point out here, right, is this group of people, depending on how long this has been their career path, they're also going to have to shift careers. So while there is a higher level of competition, the question is, are they actually going to be competing with you? Because they are going to have to potentially garner new skills, re-educate themselves, upskill themselves, recertify, come up with a game plan to really shift their career movement from what they have been. If they are newly into this market, might not be a big deal. But if it's something to where they've been in it, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, then they might have to actually upskill and reskill themselves entirely. So overall, from the DEI attacks, if you will, on the job market, it is going to be a negative impact to most of you as job seekers from a candidacy and competition perspective. But that assumes that they're actually going to compete against you in your given role. All right. Next one is going to be the federal hiring freeze. I'm actually going to combine two, being fully transparent. So federal hiring freeze and federal government return to in-person work. So both of these are going to have a similar impact to the DEI one, to where I believe it was any midstream offers have been canceled at the federal government level. Net new positions that are not military or deemed, emergency or necessary have been halted. And then the return to work is also probably going to cause some people to just quit. So between both of these efforts, anybody that was looking to get a job with the federal government is now you're probably going to have to look for something elsewhere. So again, this is going to redirect some level of competition. Really, this is redirecting candidate competition, but the returning to work is going to cause a re-entry into the workforce, I imagine, from people who are not willing to do that, and they are going to shift into the private sector. And this can be across any and every type of job. So this is a very agnostic type of competition increase, unlike the DEI side, where I mentioned you might have a career shift, a level of upskilling, etc. These people could be finance people, they could be blue collar, they could be technology people, they could be AI people. We really don't know who this is going to impact, because it's going to be up to the individual that just isn't willing to go back into any sort of office. So again, we don't know the number, we don't know the scope. So this is a very, very, very undefined competitive increase in the job market perspective. Again, just like from the DEI perspective, in the long run, this theoretically means we have more people contributing to the private sector side, which therefore is going to increase job creativity and economic gain in the long run. But it definitely remains to be seen. So thus far, we have some overall negative impacts here. Now, one that's a little bit more on the neutral side is, so if you look into the immigration changes, ignore the border and all of that component, because we're talking about the job market. But one of the things that actually is a possibility, the language was unclear from my perspective, is there could be a reduction in the amount of work visas that are being issued. So I consider this one neutral, because I'm always in favor of hiring for the best candidate. I don't care if you are here, if you're abroad, it doesn't matter. Best should get the role that the company obviously can afford and adhere to and allows their culture to succeed. And so the positive side of this is this would mean more jobs available to Americans traditionally in the technology and agriculture side, which are very heavy work visa industries. You also have hospitality up there as well. So these might not be looking to issue the work visas or bring over immigrants either temporarily or permanently, whichever one it is, and look towards American workers. Downside is the fact that we might be sacrificing the best of the best. And this isn't to discount that Americans are terrible. It's there's great people and terrible people in every way that you slice and dice them. So this one I consider sort of a neutral impact. It realistically reduces the competitive factor in terms of us as job candidates. Therefore, so you should have more opportunity available to you. Like I said, naming the top kind of sectors are generally technology and agriculture, but it might also bleed into hospitality and other ones. But this also means that companies may not be getting the best hire possible. So that's why I consider that one sort of a neutral. It has both a positive and a negative known quantities already. Now, this one is going to be, again, really affecting the government workers, but also outside of the federal side of the equation. So this one is sort of a couple degrees of separation to really gauge an impact. So the revoking of federal funding to any sanctuary city, county, state, etc. for illegal immigration. So this is one that on the surface doesn't really connect to the job market, but there is federal funding given to states and municipalities for jobs, for contracts, for infrastructure, for, and infrastructure in this case, I'm meaning, electricity, utilities, roads, bridges, etc. And so if where you live decides to retain their sanctuary status, there might be a decrease in the federal funding, which therefore means a decrease in jobs across the board from a blue collar, white collar perspective. So this is one that it's not a direct gut punch impact. It depends on where you live and how they react, and at the same time, how this is enforced. But this is one I felt was worth calling out, because the potential impact, I mean, we could be talking about tens or hundreds of millions of dollars that are lost in more local municipalities from federal funding due to this discrepancy between local and federal. Also, enforcement, legality, there is some questions around this one, but this does have the potential impact to reduce the jobs available in a given number of areas across the nation. And so something to be aware of. Next one is going to be the clean energy subsidy removal and halting on new wind farms. So I'm actually going to lump this in as well with the American Energy Executive Order as well. So we'll kind of tackle these both together because they are both, it's sort of a push and pull just depending on which part of the energy industry you are in. So the clean energy side of subsidies in terms of wind, solar, etc., have been eliminated from my understanding within the language. Even more specifically, wind farm leasing and land grants have been completely halted as a whole. So if you are in wind energy or if you are in solar, these specific niches could be impacted. And this is not just going to be the technicians or installers or manufacturers, but it's also your sales teams, your coordinators, permitting organizations, things like that. So there's definitely a widespread impact that I called this out in my 2025 prediction video that I would expect if you are in clean energy that is not nuclear, that you should expect to probably reskill or change careers, and that this growth that has been happening over the last, 5-10 years rapidly, you should expect to decrease. And I think that this is going to impact that negatively. So if you are in solar or wind energy, it's definitely not, 5-alarm fire type situation, but it's definitely yellow flag. I'd be looking at going into other green energy industries, or if that's what you're passionate about, or if you are on that technician side, you're more that hands-on, look to translate your skills to another form of mechanics. If you're on sales, look to get into a different sales organization. I've definitely worked with multiple people who have transitioned from solar sales into SaaS or agriculture or other aspects. So definitely just, if you're on that, like I said, if you're in the wind or solar, I would not consider everything super, super safe. I don't think that the government backing of subsidies is going to continue to be there. If you're in a just genuinely profitable, functioning company, then, it's capitalism, right? It should work out in the long run. But don't expect that if your company has been surviving on the government dole, that your job is now safe either. Now, on the flip side, if you are in nuclear or oil, gas, and coal type of energy, this should be a ramp up period for you. So this is going to be a level of where, actually, let's tie in a third executive order, the one specifically about Alaska. You go to the Keystone Pipeline and that sort of equation. That was an immediate 10,000 job loss that was imposed by the previous administration. Reinstatement of that pipeline, reinstatement of drilling of oil and gas, of liquefied natural gas, which is a form of clean energy as well. All of these different components are being ramped up. They're eliminating the delays on new permits. They're streamlining project approval process. They are eliminating, or as I mentioned before, eliminating the government mandates and subsidies on EVs, which then affects automotive. And so all in all, this administration is very, very heavily trying to empower this side of the energy equation. So clean energy through natural gas, which is ultimately just oil and gas industry, and nuclear. So if these are your industries, expect booms. If you are looking for an industry change, look to these industries. These are going to be hiring. And as someone who has worked in oil and gas before, please know oil and gas jobs are some of the highest paying out there, even without you changing your current state of today. They very, very much demand a lot. It's a very high demand industry. But with that, they pay you to try and do their best to compensate for the high demand equation. And then aside from, just the decrease in the other green energies and the increase in here, the other side that's going to impact this, which is going to affect the timeline issue here, is they are looking to, within the next 30 days, begin to deregulate the overall impediment the cost to consumers for energy consumption. So they're spending the first 30 days since this executive order, beginning to evaluate, and they will begin the deregulation effort to decrease the cost to consumers, which therefore will ramp up the consumption of consumers, because that has always been the trend. When gas is cheaper, people road trip more, drive more, etc. Logistics get cheaper. It just becomes this giant deflationary effect, typically speaking, and people consume more. So if you're looking for new industry, look to go here. If you are in the wind or solar industry, look to decrease or look to shift for better or worse. So this one, again, I think that in the grand scheme is probably net positive. I believe there are more people employed across oil, gas, coal, nuclear, and mineral extraction type of industries than there are in wind and solar. So there are more people currently in place today that are positively affected. But I've worked with a lot of wind and solar people that have transitioned either, like I said, that are, field technicians into other forms of field tech or engineering, or on the sales side into other industries, project management into other industries as well. So it's one of those things to where I would just look to take your skills and transition elsewhere to a different industry. And there really won't need to be a lot of upskilling or huge career shifting. And if you wanted to stay in energy because that's what you're passionate about, then maybe look to these other ones like a nuclear where it's really clean, or look to a natural gas company specifically. And the last thing that I'll add on here is specifically, they also called out the increasing of exporting of liquefied natural gas. So as I mentioned there, look for companies that are maybe in the natural gas space specifically, or in the pipeline industry specifically. This is definitely going to see a ramp up in job creation as well. All right. Next one. So this one is really only affecting federal contractors, but I tend to think that also private sectors sometimes follow suit from the government, whether that's federal, state, or local. But the federal government on the contracting side has eliminated the requirement of pay equity and transparency. If any of you have read my previous blogs and things like this on this, I am fully against, personally, pay equity and transparency. I believe you should get paid what your value is and what you can negotiate for. And just because someone holds the same title as you, they don't even need to be paid near you. And at the same time, the company doesn't need to put this out. If you don't know how to negotiate, if you don't know what you are worth, if you're not willing to advocate for yourself and research, that's on you. That's not on the company to have to put it out there for you. Gain the skills for negotiation and research. There are life skills in every facet. Let's toss that aside. So with this on the federal contracting side, this could mean actually an increase in the federal contracting world. It really could just end up being neutral. I don't think it's going to be a negative. I don't really see how this makes a negative impact in general in the job market. So I see it as only neutral or positive, and I'll explain both. Neutral could just end up with no cost savings, no additional expenditure, there really isn't a grand change in the scheme of things. So contracting just continues as it is. Where the potential positive is, like I mentioned before, is not everybody knows how to negotiate or research or advocate for themselves. And so this means that companies could actually end up with money savings from the labor perspective. This then could be reinvested into more labor, more contracts, more things that they can get done. And so there is a possibility for a positive here. I think more often than not, this is going to end up as a neutral, but the potential positive I felt is worth calling out. Not going to spend a lot of time on that one. All right. There also was a regulatory freeze. So this is one that actually could have very, very big impact on the surface. One of the big things with the administration coming in was going to be deregulation efforts, which would theoretically free up companies. So there is a regulatory freeze, meaning no new regulations can be put in place. Anything that hasn't been approved is halted, and it must go under severe scrutiny before being put in place. There's also rumors of Trump putting in his previous executive order that required a certain number of current regulations to be removed to enact a new regulation at a bare minimum in order to offset the cost. So there's no additional new cost for new regulations. But he could go past that as well. Not quite sure. But the reason that this could have wide sweeping impact is because the reason why right now by polls, small, medium, and large business sentiment and hope is at highs that haven't been felt or recorded in a long time, even under Trump's first administration. Like this is, I believe it's a couple decades, is because they are hoping that they can be unshackled and focus on profits again and actually reinvest and innovate how they best see fit. And so while this isn't a deregulation effort, this is a regulatory freeze. This is the first step to deregulation. So this could signal to companies a level of hope to where they are more willing to temporarily hurt their bottom line, or maybe use some loan funds or things like this in some sort of hiring frenzy to some degree in order for preparation for the shackles coming off or upcoming initiatives. So this is definitely a question mark. I do not see this being a negative in the job market in any way. I definitely also don't really see it being neutral. I think that this only has the potential to be positive, and it's just whether or not how many companies see this as an opportunity or as the step one of the deregulation effort that was promised. So I do think that this could take a little bit to take effect, especially because I believe the time frame called out is the freezes for the foreseeable future. But a lot of these deregulation efforts start to take place in 30, 60, or 90 days, depending on the executive order. So I really think that immediately there might be a small uptick in hiring, but definitely we're talking, it's going on end of January. So February, March, April. By end of April, we should really start to see if companies have that hope and have the ability to hire a lot more. All right, next one. So this one is one that I think that most people they didn't expect me to talk about, as how it would affect the job market, but the TikTok ban delay. So this is actually twofold in how this is actually impacting the job market. One is just the amount of employees that they have. I actually should have done that before we're recording this video, but let's see if we can look it up here real quick. TikTok U.S. employees. So it's about 7,000 employees. So that's 7,000 people that are not immediately going back into the job market from a lack of competition perspective. Now, the other side of it is a lot of people make some side hustle income from TikTok, especially the younger generation. The Gen Zers and very young millennials are heavily on TikTok, making money through ads, through merch, through TikTok Shop, etc. So one of the ways that they are getting money to be able to spend in the economy to a decent degree, because a lot of times the side hustle income is the fun money. It is what allows them to buy goods and luxuries and these sorts of things. And sometimes, depending on where they're living in the certain scenario, it actually is their requirement to even be able to pay rent and these sorts of things as well. But this is huge because it's not just the 7,000 jobs, but it's the tens or hundreds of thousands of creators that are also making money on this that is going into the economy in one way, shape, or form. So I think that having the 90-day delay, massive win for the job market in the grand scheme of things. Now, potential massive loss. And this is getting a little bit more political for a very, very short amount of time. There is the rumor or proposal of the government themselves owning 50% of TikTok. I think this would be an atrocious idea. Government ownership of private entities, absolutely against it. It sets a terrible precedent. They should not be involved. It is a lose across the board if that were to happen. So I disagree with that aspect of the delay and the negotiation rumors that have been in play. All right, getting back to actual job market effects here. So something else that could affect a level of jobs across a couple different industries. We've already talked about industry. We've already talked about energy, but the report for deregulation and fuel cost reduction, as I mentioned, is a 30-day time limit. The other two aspects where they have a 30-day report for how to solve the problem is housing cost reduction and housing supply expansion. So this could be a huge win across the board. So on the surface, from just a direct line of job creation, this is going to be blue collar. Now, we're talking a 30-day report for how to reduce the housing costs. Specifically, it was in more of the regulatory side. I think that this is then going to speed up building. So blue collar jobs are going to be even in higher demand than they are right now. And supply expansion, this is also going to be huge from the logistics perspective. So direct, this is going to affect logistics and supply chain and blue collar job creation, which I think is a huge win. Now, the indirect is, I think that the reason a lot of people are bowing out of the job market, giving up, and are just at their wits' end is there's just no carrot. It's just stick after stick after stick when it comes to them working and pushing themselves and growing and evolving. And so if they actually see the dream and the potential of being able to buy a house again, of being able to have affordable housing, whether that's for rent or for purchase, I think that this can be a huge morale boost across the nation, especially in the younger population, that is actually going to be a huge positive to the job market. Because I think this is going to, technically speaking, bring maybe a lot of people back into the job market, because the current unemployment rate does not reflect people who have truly left. I believe that estimate is in the double-digit percentage points, not the 4.1 or 4.0 percentage unemployment that is currently being touted. But it's actually, I think, like 10 or 12% is the actual unemployment when you factor in people who have left. So there's going to be an increase in competition if this has the effect that I think it does, by providing a positive reinforcement or an incentive structure to bring people back. But this is going to take something that's going to take time, because this is going to be in 30 days. We have the report of how to make it happen. Then they're going to have to enact making it happen. Then it's going to have to take effect. So while this is going to have this overall effect, I think it's going to be a level of slow trickling. But this is something to where you might start to see housing providers and builders, start to begin to ramp up some hiring and coordination efforts in 30 days, 90 days, maybe it's 6 months. I think after the 6 months, if this actually becomes into play, then this is where we're going to start to see that incentive structure get realized by people. Housing costs come down because the supply is increasing, so on and so forth. So that's one that is also interesting that we will have more insight into 30 days from now. The last one about 30 days is actually just straight up targeted all federal agencies at job creation and labor force expansion. So again, we'll have an idea of how they're planning to do this in 30 days from now. So I think that we'll have a lot more insight there. Theoretically, this is nothing but positive, but depending on how they go about it, I think there's a general misnomer about federal job creation is if they are doing it by spurring the economy and its actual private sector growth without subsidies, without expenditure, it's a win-win-win. But if it's, hey, we're expanding infrastructure and we're going to do more federal contracts, this is all just temporary job creation. That's what people forget when it comes to we're building a new bridge, or we're doing this new project, or we're doing this infrastructure bill. Those are all temporary jobs. They go away. It is to do this project. When the project's over, the jobs are lost. Doesn't help. It's not permanent. It's not sustainable. So this one will be interesting. We'll have more insight into in 30 days. All right. So like I said, this is going to be back and forth of positives and negatives. Now we're going to get back to another negative for the job market specifically. So one of the things that flip-flopped between Trump's first administration, Biden administration, and now Trump again, is that if people in agencies, all federal employees, if they do not enact the faithful policy of what is approved by either the legislature or the executive branch, so as long as it's actually approved, but if they disagree with it, so they don't faithfully implement the policy, they could be fired under Trump's first administration. They couldn't be fired under Biden. They can now be fired again. So you couple this with the hiring freeze and the return to work, right? This could cause a continuous influx or kind of an additional stack of influx into the job market of potential competition from a candidate perspective. Yeah, so that one's pretty plain and simple. So they can now more easily be fired. Give me a second to get water. Okay. Next up was reviewing the trade deficits. So this is one that is very unknown. The sentiment and intent I know is great. The result, as I said in my 2025 prediction, is going to be very unknown. So how the approach is being made to this. So they are going to look at the trade deficits. Why do they exist? They're also going to look at specifically two manufacturing concepts around steel and aluminum and what tariffs exist and how does that potentially harm things. There's also the reviewing of industrial and manufacturing policies for national security. Now, you wrap these up, and theoretically, this all ends up at a positive, because we should have job creation across the board by an agreed upon incentive structure that either allows more American exports to more equally compete with goods in those given countries. So that would raise job creation here in America because we have more demand abroad. Or it ends up creating American jobs here because they can't agree on a low tariff, no tariff option. And instead they tariff that organization or that country or that industry or whatever that's coming as an import, and now begins to be made here in America because it is cheaper to do so here. So either way, this should end up in job creation. However, there is the possibility that if this just ends up as one big pissing contest and people can't actually come to agreements or implement these things correctly, that this could just be a giant disaster. So this is definitely, it remains to be seen based off of the other timelines of everything else kind of being done with info gathering phase at around 90 days or less. I think this is going to be a similar sentiment. So I think this is something that we'll need to watch out for, but should end up in a pure positive. Yeah, that is all I will say about that one. Okay, so the next one. So this is actually one that is not going to impact the majority of you, but it was worth calling out because it's a very under the table one. So in addition to the federal employee being more easily hired, they also specifically called out senior executive services people within the federal government. So these are the people that sit right beneath agency heads. Now, these people are kind of unique because they are under contract, from my understanding, and they have very, very strict stipulations for termination. So just like all federal employees, these executives now also have the ability to be fired for not actually implementing either the legislature or executive agenda that has been approved and passed by the people, for the people, etc. So how this is potentially going to affect the job market is this could cause an influx at the executive or senior leader level. So for those of you that are, we'll say, beneath VP, so director and lower, we really don't have an issue. But there could be the potential that VP, C-level, senior VP, board members, these types of roles could have an influx of unexpected candidates from being lost at the federal government level. And again, you couple this with the hiring freeze, which means you can't backfill, you can't replace. So this is one that it might break even. It might just end up being nothing. It might be a giant nothing burger, but it could actually impact the competition at the executive level, which I found interesting and I felt was worth calling out. Okay, last two. So as we all know, one of the biggest and hottest markets right now is AI. And this is not just meaning AI coders, developers, nerds, and geeks, kind of like myself, but companies that are AI oriented. They are ramping, growing, and being created to an insane degree. I still believe for 3 quarters in a row that venture capitalism, 20 or 25% of it, or maybe it's that range, is invested in AI. When you have all of venture capitalism money and 1/5 to 1/4 being invested in a specific line of work, that's huge. So there was an executive order to remove regulations that impede the innovation of the AI world. So now this was the only executive order that I wanted to talk about and call out that affected the job market that has a longer time horizon. So the action plan for the deregulation and AI innovation is not due for 180 days. So where these other ones are 30, 60, or 90, this one isn't until 180. So this is definitely more of the longer term. So we really shouldn't expect to see results of this, even though AI is rapidly growing. I mean, when you look at NVIDIA, you look at OpenAI, you look at Microsoft, you look at Salesforce, like you look at these companies that are AI first, I mean, they are massively growing. You also look at the insane agreement that just happened of the $500 billion investment across SoftBank, Oracle, et cetera, that agreed to invest in the U.S. infrastructure for data centers and AI. Massive, massive, massive. So this is a space where these companies are going to grow. And while this is going to be a 6-month delay, so we have a very long fuse, I think that lighting that fuse now at the end of that 6 months, it's going to be a huge boom. And it's going to be a boom across the board. It's going to be all positions. It's going to be project managers, HR, finance, technical, nerdy, developer, all of it. It's going to be nuts to bolts company expansion to accommodate the AI demand. So that was one that I felt like was calling out. So again, because it's more company and industry agnostic, now obviously if you are on that tangible coding, software development, large language model training side of the equation, there's probably going to be more opportunity there. But when you just look at the industry as a whole, when an industry grows, all positions in that industry grow. So if you're looking to maybe shift careers, change things up, or target a new industry, look to the AI industry to maybe be something for you, but also know that you have a 6-month delay. It's just going to continue its standard growth path for that. So it's really, really good. It's a great time to upskill and prepare to pivot into that line of work if you're somebody who is looking for a change. All right. Last executive order that I'm going to touch on here was the establishment of Doge. So I said in my previous 2025 prediction video that if Doge came in, slashed the federal workforce like they were intending, that this is going to have the negative impact. While it wasn't Doge that did the slashing, I think the previous executive orders, like I mentioned, are trying to do a passive slashing initially before Doge gets involved. The only real clear objective from the establishment of Doge that could affect the workforce that I saw thus far was a software and IT modernization initiative. And really what this called out was enhancing IT infrastructure across all agencies, streamlining IT systems, and improving the overall software quality and interoperability of agencies. So how this can affect the job market is tech has experienced a significant amount of layoffs in the last 18 months. Tens or hundreds of thousands of jobs have been laid off in the tech sector. This could then revive that to some extent, at least part of it, because the government is going to be looking for new technology improvements, new technology implementations, new software solutions, etc. So there's going to be a level of demand at the government level for modern IT solutions that hasn't been sought after before. So while this is not what I wanted from Doge, I think that at least the positive of the job market from this is there wasn't the immediate slash of workforce from them that may have been expected. That could have been hundreds of thousands of workers immediately coming back into the job market of private sector. I think that's the win from this. The other win is expecting some potential technology and software companies to have increased demand across the agencies and across the government. So there could be some more job creation in that sector. Again, just like the AI side, I think it's going to be agnostic. Okay, so quick rundown of kind of lumping these things together. So you have the negative executive order. So negative executive order impact being the job competition increasing. So again, negative impact on the job market due to increasing competition were the DEI initiative dismantling at the public sector and private sector threats of lawsuits, the federal hiring freeze, federal government return to work policies, revoking funding for sanctuary cities. You got the, 30-day, nope. Okay. So I think those are the ones that really could cause the influx. Senior executive services revamp as well. Now, the positive executive orders from the workforce perspective are going to be the clean energy and American energy for oil, gas, nuclear, and mineral extraction, increase. TikTok ban delay, increase. Housing cost reduction and supply expansion, increase. Job creation and labor force expansion report due in 30 days. You have the Alaska energy and pipeline creation, increase. Doge establishment, increase. and AI regulation reduction increase. These are all increases in job creation, theoretically. Now, most of these, like I said, we'll start to see what the potential or intended effects are in 30, 60, or 90 days. I think we won't start to feel most of these for probably 6 months or greater. So if I miss any executive orders that you feel may impact the job market, or you are curious how they might affect the job market, post below. If you like this content, hit the like button, hit the subscribe and the notification bell so you get all the new videos. If there's anything else that you want to talk about in general, or you have any feedback for my content creation so I can continue to be better for you guys as my audience, leave a comment down below. Until next time, thank you.